Okay, yesterday we took a look at fractions, decimals, and percents in relation to things that we see every day, like test scores or maybe sport averages, things like that. Today we're going to take a look at percents in relation to reading data, reading charts and graphs, that kind of thing. So, this is the chart we'll be working with today, and it's using countries and their different regions, and it kind of tells us the different percents of things like percent of the population that is under the age of 14, life expectancy, the percent of population growth in a year, and the percent of the population that is urban and the percent that is rural. So we're going to use this to answer some questions. Our first question that we want to take a look at is 21% of the population in the United States is 14 years old or younger. So what does that mean? Well, take a look down here. We find US and region 5, and we see 21%, ages 0 to 14. Remember, percents are always taken out of 100. So, basically this means that 21 out of 100 people in the United States are 14 years old or younger. So if you take a random 100 people on the street and you poll them, about 21 of them would be 14 years old or younger. Real quick review. What does urban mean and what does rural mean? Urban is living in a city or a town, and rural is living in the country, living in that sort of a region. So, according to the last two columns of the table, 80% of the US population lives in towns or cities, and 20% lives in the country. Notice how these 2% add up to 100, because these two regions include everyone, so this has to include the whole. And the 2% must equal up to 100, because 100 is the whole. Alright, so with that in mind, which countries have the greatest and least percents of their population living in the country? Go ahead and pause the video, see if you can figure that out. Alright, 84% of Ethiopia's population is rural. Well, let's find Ethiopia, there it is. And we see 84% right there, rural. So what does that mean? What does the urban population have to be then? Well, it has to fill in the gap between 84 and 100. So 16% would be urban, because 16 and 84 equal up to a whole, or 100%. And then we can also take a look at Iceland and Uruguay. So if we go down to Iceland, we see that 7% is rural, or lives in the country, which means that 93% would have to be urban, or live in the city, because these two have to equal 100, since it includes the whole population. Switching gears a little bit, let's go ahead and go over some fraction review. Which fraction is greater? Go ahead and pause the video, see if you can figure that out. Alright, which one do you think it is? 1/2. Did you get it right? So, if we use percents, we know that 1/2 is equal to 50%. And 1/3 is equal to about 33%, because we know that the decimal repeats itself. What about the second one? Well, they both have the same denominator, so which numerator is greater? That's a big hint that could help us out. 8/9 would be greater. Looking at these, they have different denominators, but we know that 5 out of 100 is 5%, because percents are always out of 100. And knowing that, we also know that 5 out of 10 is equal to 1/2, or 50%. So 5/10 would be greater. Let's do some more review. Go ahead and pause the video again and see if you can work on these. Alright, so once again, using percents, we know that this is 90%. But another way that we could do it is to think which pieces are bigger and which pieces are smaller. We know that 12 pieces to equal a whole, these are going to be smaller pieces. But 10 pieces to equal a whole, those are going to be slightly larger pieces. So, if a smaller piece is missing out of the whole, we know that this fraction is greater because this has a slightly bigger piece missing out of the whole. Moving on to the second one. This one's pretty easy. Just think, which one is closer to the whole? Closer to being 100%. 7 out of 16 is less than 1/2. On the other hand, 4 out of 5 is greater. So we know that 4/5 is bigger. And then the last one, if you want to go ahead and think money, 3 out of 4 quarters would be 75%. So there we go. And if you wanted to think of this one in money, we know that it takes 20 nickels or 25-cent pieces to equal $1. So if you had 3, because we have 17, so there are 3 5-cent pieces missing, we know that equals 15 cents. So if we're missing 15, that's going to equal 85%. So this one would be larger. Alright, and in class tomorrow we will be working on reading more charts and using this in relation to percents, decimals, and fractions, and learning about different populations and taking those pieces to add up to the whole.